So Stanley and Zero have decided to start walking towards this God's thumb that they see off in the distance. They put 4 of the unbroken jars in the burlap sack. So I guess it's a good thing that Stanley hung on to the sack from the sunflower seeds in case they might be able to use the unbroken jars for something. Stanley carried the sack. Zero held the shovel. "I should warn you," Stanley said. "I'm not exactly the luckiest guy in the world. Remember that no-good, dirty, rotten great-great-grandfather? Pig-stealing great-great-grandfather?" Zero wasn't worried. "When you spend your whole life living in a hole," he said, "the only way you can go is up." Because if we think about what we've learned about Zero's life, he doesn't have any family that he's in contact with. Before he came to Green Lake, he was in foster care and homeless, not staying with foster care, running away, but not having a regular home that he went to, a family that he went to. So he's saying, when you start at the bottom, the only way you can go is up. They gave each other the thumbs up sign, just like the rock. It's giving them encouragement, and headed out. It was the hottest part of the day. Stanley's empty canteen was still strapped around his neck. You know how it repeats empty over and over? It did that last time it was talking about his empty canteen too. What is that when the words, or at least the beginning sounds, repeat over and over and over? Very good. Alliteration. He thought back to the water truck and wished he'd at least stopped and filled his canteen before running off. They hadn't gone very far before Zero had another attack. He clutched his stomach as he let himself fall to the ground. Stanley could only wait for it to pass. The sploosh had saved Zero's life, but it was now destroying him from the inside. So this is what we call irony. Something is happening the opposite of something else, or what you would expect something to follow. So he thought that this peach drink was saving his life, and it did save his life, but it's also causing him problems and destroying him from the inside out. So irony, it's showing the opposite effect. Sometimes it can be humorous and funny. Sometimes it can be used to show emphasis on something, or to show how sad it is, or show emotion with it. So in this case, it's rather sad, right? That it saved his life, but now it's hurting him. He wondered how long it would be before he, too, felt the effects. Although Stanley hasn't drank as much as Zero has, because Zero has had 15 and a half jars. Stanley's only had half. He looked at Big Thumb. It didn't seem any closer than when he first started out. Zero took a deep breath and managed to sit up. "Can you walk?" Stanley asked him. "Just give me a second," Zero said. He took another breath, then, using the shovel, pulled himself back to his feet. He gave Stanley the thumbs up sign. "Sir, we got this," and they continued. Sometimes Stanley would try to go for a long while without looking at Big Thumb. He'd make a mental snapshot of how it looked, then wait maybe 10 minutes before looking at it again to see if it seemed closer. It never did. It was like chasing the moon. Remember we said in the last chapter, it just seems like it's never coming. As much as you go towards it, it continues to go on. And if they ever reached it, he realized, they'd still have to climb this mountain. "I wonder who she was," said Zero. "Who?" "Mary Lou," said Zero. Stanley smiled. "I guess she was once a real person on a real lake." "It's hard to imagine." "I bet she was pretty," said Zero. "Somebody must have loved her a lot to name a boat after her." "Well, she wasn't a real person, but she was a real what?" "Yeah, a donkey. A really extraordinarily old donkey. And I don't know about pretty, but someone definitely loved her a lot. Who loved her? Yeah, Sam. Yeah, said Stanley. I bet she looked great in a bathing suit, sitting in the boat while her boyfriend rowed. I don't think that was... Yeah, goats can't wear bathing suits. But here they are in this really rough situation, and now they're starting to imagine and discuss what ifs, almost as a way to maybe keep their mind off of it. Yeah. Zero used the shovel as a third leg. 2 legs weren't enough to keep him up. I got to stop and rest, he said after a while. Stanley looked at Big Thumb. It still didn't look any closer. He was afraid if Zero stopped, he might never get started again. We're almost there, he said. He wondered which was closer, Camp Green Lake or Big Thumb. I really have to sit down. Just see if you can go a little... Zero collapsed. The shovel stayed up a fraction of a second longer, perfectly balanced on the tip of the blade, and then it fell next to him. Zero knelt, bent over with his head on the ground. Stanley could hear a very low, moaning sound coming from him. He looked at the shovel and couldn't help but think that he might need to dig a grave. Zero's last hole. And who will dig a grave for me, he thought. It's very sad to be thinking such, isn't it? They need to keep positive thoughts in their head, right? But Zero did get up, once again, flashing the thumbs up. Give me some words, he said weakly. It took Stanley a few seconds to realize what he meant. Then he smiled and said, R-U-N. Zero sounded it out to himself. Run. Good. F-U-N. Fun. The spelling seemed to help Zero. It gave him something to concentrate on besides the pain and weakness. So here's a part where we could make a personal connection. Have you ever had to think about something else to deal with something bad going on? Like, for instance, when I go to the dentist, which isn't necessarily bad, but not always something people enjoy. But when you go to the dentist and you're sitting in the chair and the dentist is, doing her job, do you ever close your eyes and maybe imagine you're sitting on a beach listening to the ocean waves, or jumping on the trampoline with your best friend, or something to get your mind off of the dental work going on? Or maybe you're sitting in class and you're ready for the weekend and you're daydreaming of what you're going to do on the weekend to try to make the school day go faster. So if you've ever thought about something else to deal with something you were going through, that'd be a personal connection that you could write about. It distracted Stanley as well. And the next time he looked up at Big Thumb, it really did seem closer. They quit spelling words when it hurt too much to talk. Stanley's throat was dry. He was weak and exhausted. So we're finding some very tough character traits here, because the boys are determined. They don't want to give up. They keep going forward, but they are very tired. They're exhausted. They're very thirsty. Their throats are dry. And yet, as bad as Stanley felt, he knew that Zero felt 10 times worse. As long as Zero could keep going, he could keep going too. It was possible, he thought, he hoped, that he didn't get any of the bad bacteria. Zero hadn't been able to unscrew the lid. Maybe the bad germs couldn't get in either. Maybe the bacteria were only in the jars which opened easily, the ones he was now carrying in his sack. What scared Stanley the most about dying wasn't his actual death. Listen to this. He figured he could handle the pain. It wouldn't be much worse than what he felt now. In fact, maybe at the moment of his death, he would be too weak to feel pain. Death would be a relief. What worried him the most was the thought of his parents not knowing what happened to him, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. He hated to imagine what it would be like for his mother or father, day after day, month after month, not knowing, living on false hope. For him, at least, it would be over. For his parents, the pain would never end. And that's what worries him the most. which is kind of sad. Because one, Stanley has quite a lot to offer to the world. We don't want to lose him or Zero. But to think that his main concern is for his parents and the pain that they would feel, that really speaks to Stanley's character. And we've seen that same character throughout the entire book, because he's always wanted to write to his mom, but when he writes to his mom, he doesn't tell her the truth. He doesn't tell her how bad it is. He tells her positive things because he doesn't want her to worry. He wondered if the warden would send out a search party to look for him. It didn't seem likely. She didn't send anyone to look for Zero, but no one cared about Zero. They simply destroyed his files. Thankfully, Stanley is there to care for Zero. But Stanley had a family. She couldn't pretend he was never there. He wondered what she would tell them, and when. "What do you think's up there?" Zero asked. Stanley looked to the top of Big Thumb. "Oh, probably an Italian restaurant." Zero managed to laugh. "I think I'll get a pepperoni pizza and a large root beer," said Stanley. "I want an ice cream sundae," said Zero, "with nuts and whipped cream and bananas and hot fudge." The sun was almost directly in front of them. The thumb pointed up toward it. They came to the end of the lake. Huge white stone cliffs rose up before them. Unlike the eastern shore, where Camp Green Lake was situated, the western shore did not slope down gradually. It was as if they had been walking across the flat bottom of a giant frying pan, and now somehow they had to climb up out of it. So if you think about a frying pan, you've got the ledge, the handle, and then it goes down into that pit. Well, it's kind of like that. You know, their hats almost look like an upside-down frying pan, don't they? Because there's the handle, and then there's where the lake would be. So if you turn it upside down, you can almost imagine this is the land, and then this would have been filled in with water. Stanley says one side of it sloped gradually. It wasn't too hard to go down into. And the other side of it, whoop, straight up, a mountain. God's thumb. Now, they have to climb up it. They could no longer see the Big Thumb. The cliffs blocked their view. The cliffs also blocked out the sun. Zero groaned and clutched his stomach, but he remained standing. "I'm all right," he whispered. Stanley saw a rut, about a foot wide and 6 inches deep, running down a cliff. On either side of the rut were a series of ledges. "Let's try there," he said. It looked to be about a 50-foot climb, straight up. Stanley still managed to hold the sack of jars in his left hand as he slowly moved up, from ledge to ledge, crisscrossing the rut. At times, he had to use the side of the rut for support in order to make it to the next ledge. Zero stayed with him, somehow. His frail body trembled terribly as he climbed the stone wall. So if we think of the traits, these boys have been without food, without water. They had that sploosh, but they're very tired. Zero is very frail. He's sick. Some of the ledges were wide enough to sit on. Others stuck out no more than a few inches, just enough for a quick step. Stanley stopped about 2/3 of the way up on a fairly wide ledge. Zero came up alongside him. "You okay?" Stanley asked. Zero gave the thumbs up sign. Stanley did the same. So these boys, they are not willing to give up, are they? What word could we use to say that they are not willing to give up? They're very what? Starts with a D. Determined. He looked above him. He wasn't sure how he'd get to the next ledge. It was 3 or 4 feet above his head, and he didn't see any footholds. He was afraid to look down. "Give me a boost," said Zero. "Then I'll pull you up with the shovel." "You won't be able to pull me up," said Stanley. Remember their big size difference? Stanley was the biggest boy in the group. Zero was the smallest. "Yes, I will," said Zero. Remember, Zero is what? He is determined. Have you ever been so determined to do something that you were able to do something that others didn't think you'd be able to do? Okay, that could be a personal connection too. Stanley cupped his hands together. So we've got some order. Let's see how they do this. First, Stanley cupped his hands together. Then, Zero stepped on his interwoven fingers. He was able to lift Zero high enough for him to grab the protruding slab of rock. That's 3. Stanley continued to help him from below as Zero pulled himself up onto the ledge. That's 4. Zero's now on the ledge. While Zero was getting himself situated up there, that's 5, Stanley attached the sack to the shovel by poking a hole through the burlap, and then he held it up to Zero. That's step 6. Zero first grabbed hold of the sack, 7, then grabbed the shovel. He set the shovel so that half the blade was supported by the rock slab. The wooden shaft hung down toward Stanley. "Okay," he said. Stanley doubted this would work. It was one thing for him to lift Zero, who was half his weight. It was quite another for Zero to pull him up. But remember, Zero is determined. Stanley grabbed hold of the shovel as he climbed up the rock wall, using the sides of the rut to help support him. His hands moved one over the other up the shaft of the shovel. He felt Zero's hands clasp his wrist. He let go of the shaft with one hand and grabbed the top of the ledge. He gathered his strength and for a brief second seemed to defy gravity as he took a quick step up the wall and, with Zero's help, pulled himself the rest of the way over the ledge. Wow. So they are quite determined. He caught his breath. There was no way he could have done that a few months ago. So losing some of the weight that he has lost and getting stronger from digging the holes has definitely helped him right there. He noticed a large spot of blood on his wrist. It took him a moment to realize that it was Zero's blood. Zero had deep gashes in both hands. He had held on to the metal blade of the shovel, keeping it in place as Stanley climbed. Let me read that again. Zero had deep gashes in both hands. He had held on to the metal blade of the shovel, keeping it in place as Stanley climbed. So Zero sacrificed his hands to help Stanley. Have you ever given something up so that someone else could do something? Maybe not as drastic as Zero here, where he ends up with cuts on his hands. Maybe you wanted to spend the night with your best friend, but mom needed you to watch your sister, so you gave up going to your friend's house so you could help your mom. Or maybe there was only 2 cupcakes left, and your 2 younger siblings wanted the cupcakes, and you wanted a cupcake too, but you let them have it because they were the youngest and you loved them. So you gave up your cupcake so that they could have one. Have you ever done something like that? That'd be a personal connection, a time when you sacrifice something. Zero brought his hands to his mouth and sucked up his blood. One of the glass jars had broken in the sack. They decided to save the pieces, just like Stanley saved the burlap. They might need it to make a knife or something. Stanley ended up needing the sack that he saved, so they're going to save it. They rested briefly, then continued on up. It was a fairly easy climb the rest of the way. When they reached flat ground, Stanley looked up to see the sun, a fiery ball, balancing on top of Big Thumb. Ooh, they're comparing the sun to a fiery ball. It's a metaphor. God was twirling a basketball. And they're comparing that sun, saying it looks like it would look if God were twirling a basketball. That's a metaphor too. It didn't use like. Soon they were walking in the long, thin shadow of the thumb. They are getting closer. Whew. Chapter 37 begins with, "We're almost there." And that's where we'll pick up in the next video. Bye, guys.